Cameras present a scene from a particular point of view. The camera position impacts on the way we interpret a scene. A bird's eye view gives us an overview of the layout. An eye-level view is usually in neutral position, while low angles make the scene appear larger. Close-ups help us highlight details of our design. First, we will see how we can place a camera and the methods we follow to adjust the camera's position, and then we will explore the camera's settings. Cameras in 3ds Max and V-Ray follow the same rules as real-world cameras. They have settings like f-stop, ISO, and shutter speed, which allow us to adjust the brightness of our render. So first, I will explain to you how an actual camera works, and then we will translate all that info into the virtual world and our 3ds Max scene. Open the file cameras.max. In this file, there are no cameras since we will see in this part together how to place them. To create a camera, go to the command panel, click on the Create tab, and then choose Cameras. Click on the standard drop-down list, select V-Ray, and then choose V-Ray Physical Camera from the Object Type rollout. To place a camera, we need to click and hold, drag the mouse, and where we leave it, the camera target is placed. Let me repeat it, not just click, but click and hold it. Drag the cursor, and where you leave it, the target is placed. I will hit the delete button from my keyboard because I don't need this camera. So, going back to the first camera I set, a V-Ray physical camera consists of two elements, the camera and the camera target, and those two are connected to each other with a line. When the V-Ray physical camera is selected, we can also see the field of view, which is the area inside this triangle, and the depth of field of the camera, which is this area. I will explain depth of field in detail later. After placing the camera, the first thing we need to do is to change one of the viewports to show the camera's view. To do so, click in the perspective window. To activate it, then click on the viewport's name label, perspective, and from the drop-down menu, select Cameras. The camera submenu appears and shows the name of every camera in the scene. Select V-Ray Cam 001 since for now we only have one camera. The viewport now shows the V-Ray Cam 001 point of view. At a first glance, the point of view we get in our example looks odd since one would expect to see the interior of the bedroom. The reason the point of view looks like this is because anything we create in 3ds Max is placed at height 0. So, if we go to the front view and check where the camera is positioned, we will see that it is basically in the floor. So the next step is to select and elevate the V-Ray physical camera. When we go from one viewport to another, always right-click to activate the viewport. This way, your selected object remains selected. If you left-click, the new viewport will be activated, but your object is deselected. If we deselect the camera, here are a few ways on how to select it. Press the H key on your keyboard. The Select from Scene dialog box appears, which shows in alphabetical order all the objects in the scene. Scroll down to find and select the camera, V-Ray Cam 001, and or the camera target, V-Ray Cam 001.target. If you want to select both, choose one of them and then select the other one by holding the Control key. Then click the OK button. Another way is to click on the camera's viewport name label, V-Ray Cam 001, and from the drop-down menu, choose Select Camera or Select Camera Target. And the third way is to click directly from the viewports on the camera or on the camera target. If we click on the line that connects the two, then they both get selected. Sometimes it is difficult to select a camera from the viewports because other objects are on top of it. An easy way to select specific types is by using the selection filter from the main toolbar. The selection filter list lets us restrict the selection to specific categories. When the selection filter is all, we can select all the objects from the scene. If, for instance, we click on All and choose Cameras, then we can select only cameras from the viewports, and the other objects in the scene freeze. If you select the camera and go to the command panel, you see in the name and color field that the camera is automatically named VirayCam 001, while if you select the target, it is named VirayCam 001.target. By selecting both the camera and the target, the name and color input changes to one camera selected. You can always rename them as you wish. Now that we have placed the camera, we see its point of view in the viewport and we have selected it, it's time to adjust its position. There are two different ways that we can do that: using the transform commands or using the camera navigation controls. With the camera selected, to activate the select and move command, we can do one of the following. Click on the select and move command from the main toolbar, or press the W key on your keyboard, or right click and choose move from the quad menu. Go to the front view, click on the Y-axis, the green arrow, and drag the Viray physical camera higher. The VirayCam 001 viewport updates as we are adjusting the position of the camera. If we want to place the camera at a specific height, let's say at 120 centimeters, we need to use the coordinate display in the status bar. More specifically, select the camera, go to the Z field down here, and type 120. Then select the camera target and do the same. Now both the camera and the target are placed at 120 centimeters. Make sure Show Safe Frames is enabled. We have completed placing the camera using the select and move command, so now we will see how we can achieve the same result using the camera viewport controls. Let's select and delete this camera and place it from scratch. So, go to the cameras, click on the Viray physical camera, go to the top view and click, hold and drag to place the camera. And where you leave it, the target is placed. Go to the perspective viewport, click on the perspective name and choose Cameras VirayCam 001. The viewport changes to the camera. As we said before, when we place a camera, it is by default placed at height 0, so the next step is to elevate it. At the bottom left corner of the 3ds Max window are the buttons that control the display and navigation of the viewports. The navigation controls change depending on the active viewport. When we change to a camera view, the navigation controls change to the camera viewport controls. With the VirayCam 001 viewport active, click on the second command from the bottom row, Track Camera. This command allows us to move both the camera and the camera target parallel to the view plane. Since we only want to adjust the height of the camera, press and hold the Shift key to constrain the movement and then drag the cursor higher parallel to the Z-axis. If here you don't see the track command, click and hold and you will see 3 commands that pop up. Select Track Camera. Use the dolly camera and target command to move the camera along its main axis, toward or away from what the camera is pointing at. If you hold down the dolly camera button, a flyout menu appears. You can select to either move the camera, dolly camera, or its target, dolly target, or both, dolly camera and target. The track and the dolly commands are basically the ones I use to adjust the camera's position. From the navigation controls, there are two more commands that I use all the time, the last two. If you click on the Maximize Viewport command, you can maximize the active viewport and so see it better. If you click again, you return to the 4-window layout. And then there is the Zoom Extends All selected command. Select, for instance, the armchair and click on the Zoom Extends All selected command. The viewports zoom in to the selected object. Well, all the viewports apart from the camera viewport, which has a still point of view. If we go to the top view to see where the camera is located, we will see that it is placed right in front of the wall. Although we have placed it at the very back of the room, we only see a zoomed part of it. To capture more, the first thing we need to adjust is the focal length of the camera. Select the camera, VRayCam 001, go to the Modify tab in the Command panel to see the camera settings, and go to the Sensor and Lens Rollout. Focal length defines how wide the angle of view will look. The lower this value, the wider the angle. The default value is 40, type 30 and press Enter. If we see the camera viewport, we get the illusion that we stepped back, but we didn't move the camera. The lens of the camera got wider. Try 20 and press Enter. Now the camera captures more. The lower the focal length, the more items it captures, but also it starts getting a bit distorted. The objects in the foreground start to look bigger than what they are in reality. I usually avoid using focal length values lower to 25 to avoid any distortion of the scene. So use 28 for our example, and in order to have a better overview of the room, we will use the clipping planes. When the camera is selected, we see the field of view, and that helps us understand which parts of the scene are visible in the camera viewport. So if I want the sitting area to be visible in the camera viewport, my camera should be placed somewhere here. Try with your imagination to extend this triangle, and whatever is inside it is visible in the camera viewport. But when I push that back, I am now behind the wall, so the only thing I see in the camera viewport is this wall. But that's fine, because the next step is to activate the clipping planes. With the VRayCam 001 selected, go to the Modify tab in the Command panel. Scroll down and open the Clipping and Environment Rollout. Enable clipping. Something I haven't told you before, and it's really important, is that to see the camera's settings in the Modify tab, we need to select only the camera, not the camera target, not both. I repeat, only the camera. Clipping lets us exclude some of the scene's geometry and view only a certain portion of the scene. When enabled, 1 or 2 red planes come out of the camera. If you don't see them, then you need to zoom out. Here it is. This is the far clipping plane. We can't see the near clipping plane because it is by default set to 0. Let's type here 100 centimeters. Now, if I zoom into the camera, here is the near clipping plane placed at 100 centimeters distance from the camera. And if I zoom out, here is the far clipping plane placed at 1000 centimeter distance from the camera. Only the part of the scene that is between the near and the far planes is visible to the camera. If you are using meters, the far value is at 1000 meters, and so you need to zoom out a lot to locate the far plane. Use the arrows to increase the near clipping plane value so that the red line is placed in front of the wall. And here we are. The back wall is now excluded from the camera and we can see the seating area. I would also like to include the wardrobe, so let me step further back and adjust the near clipping. I want you to be careful because if the clipping plane intersects an object, it cuts through that object and it will render that cut part black. Now it intersects the floor and this cabinet. And let's do a crop render here. Go to the render setup, to the common tab, click on view and select crop. Hit render. So be careful when you use the clipping command to place your camera this way so that it doesn't intersect any objects. Now that we have set the camera, let's produce a render to see what we get. The result is pretty dark. Cameras in 3ds Max and V-Ray follow the same rules as real-world cameras. We said that they have settings like f-stop, ISO and shutter speed which allow us to simulate a real camera and adjust the brightness of our image. So first, it is important to understand how a camera works. In simple terms, a camera is essentially a box with an opening at the front. There, another box is attached, and inside this box there are multiple pieces of glass, the lenses. Light enters the camera through the lens and lands at the back of the camera. At the back of the camera there is the film, and in front of the film we have the shutter that basically protects the film. When we take a photo, this shutter will open just for a few seconds to exposure the film. Once the camera finishes taking the photo, the shutter closes. Before we click to take a photo, we need to see through the camera. How do we do that? Inside the camera, there is a mirror placed in front of the shutter. When the mirror is in the down position, light comes in, bounces off this mirror, up into a prism, ending into our eyes. And that's how we see through the lenses. So when we click to take a photo, basically two things happen. The mirror lifts, the shutter opens, and the film gets exposed, i.e. captures the image. Then the shutter closes, the mirror returns to its original position, and we can see again through the lens. Next step is to see how the human eye works. During daytime, when there is bright light, the iris constricts not to get harmed, while during nighttime the pupil expands to allow more light to come in for more visibility. So, going back to our camera, between the lenses we have the aperture, which basically resembles the human eye. It is spherical with a hole to allow the light to come in, and some blades that allow us to control the size of the hole, and so the amount of light that enters the camera. So why two people can take a photo of the same scene and end up with different results? Because to take a good photo, we need to adjust mainly three parameters: the aperture, the shutter speed, and the film speed, ISO. I have prepared a diagram that shows those three settings. Don't get scared by the amount of information here, we will break them down together. I just want you to have all the info in one sheet. So, let's see what do we see here. The first section refers to the aperture. What you see here is the diameter of the hole. Wide aperture means more light into the camera, but it is harder to focus. We have what we call shallow depth of field. A narrow aperture allows in little light, but we can focus over a wide range and so we get crisp renders. The default value in 3ds Max is 8, and we can go and type the value we want depending on the result we are trying to achieve. I will get back to this shortly. The second section refers to the shutter. We said earlier that the shutter opens for a specified amount of time to exposure the film, or to record the light present onto the sensor when we have a digital camera. Slower shutter speed means more light in, since the shutter will be basically open for a longer time. And it can also capture motion. If, let's say, the shutter is open for 1/8 of a second, if there is any motion during that time, it will capture it and blur the image. So when we set slow shutter speed, we can capture motion. When we use faster shutter speed, little light comes in and there is no motion. Since the shutter is only open for, let's say, 1 millisecond, that is not enough time to capture motion. Finally, ISO is setting how sensitive our film or sensor is going to be. Low ISO means less sensitive and the image will be crisper. In night scenes, we usually need high ISO. The sensor becomes much more sensitive, but there is also going to be more noise. I hope now that it is clear what each of these 3 settings mean, and let's now translate them into the virtual world in our 3D Studio Max scene. Let's save the render we got with the default settings in history. So this render is now quite dark. Select the camera and go to the Modify tab and to the Aperture Rollout. And let's start with the film speed. Smaller values make the image darker, while larger values make it brighter. Instead of 100, let's type 400 and render. This is brighter. Let's go even higher and let's type 1600. Now, higher ISO settings tell your camera's sensor to group pixels together to capture more light. This grouping effect can make your image look noisy. That's why I personally prefer, instead of adjusting the ISO, to play around with the shutter speed. So, let me take this back to 100 and go to the shutter speed. Shutter speed determines the exposure time for the virtual camera. The longer this time is, which means the smaller shutter speed values, the brighter the image will be. And the higher shutter speed value, the image will get darker. So, instead of 200, let's type 60 and produce a render. Let's now try 15. It gets brighter and brighter. Now, let me take this back to its default value of 200 and see the F-number setting. Based on our diagram, wide aperture means more light will come in. So instead of 8, let's type 4 and render. I want to go even brighter, so I will set it to 2.8 and render. But what we also said was that when we use low F numbers, items in our render will start to get out of focus. But when we see this render of F number 2.8, everything is crisp. Why? Because depth of field is by default disabled in V-Ray. Let's see how depth of field works in V-Ray. In order for you to understand better the depth of field, I would prefer to set another camera. One that I have objects in the foreground and in the background. You can see that the new camera we created has the same settings as our last one. I don't need here the clipping, so I will go to the camera settings and disable the clipping. Let's see the camera's point of view in this viewport. And let's elevate the camera. Select only the camera, go to the Modify tab, go to the Depth of Field and Motion Blur rollout and enable Depth of Field. In simple terms, depth of field allows us to focus on an object and blurs out the rest of the scene. The F number is the setting that controls the blurriness of the image in combination with the position of the camera and the camera target. So now that we enable depth of field, let's check the position of the camera. We need to have the camera selected to understand the depth of field. And what do we see here? The two lines represent the area of focus. And the center line is the center of the focus. In the center, it is going to be very crisp. And on the edges, from here and backwards, and from here and onwards, it is going to start blurring and the things will get out of focus. When we increase the F number, the area of focus increases as well. So if I make it 4, you see that the edge is expanded. Let's make it 8 or 11 and so on. But don't forget that as we increase F number, at the same time less light will be getting in. So let's first produce a render with F number 2.8. My render seems to be pretty dark, so let me stop it and make the shutter speed 60. You can see that everything in the background is crisp and the foreground is blurry. Now, let's move the target so that we move the area of focus. Always select the camera to understand the area of focus. So now, the area of focus is the coffee table with the glass on top. Let me repeat it one more time. When depth of field is disabled, we don't care where the target is or what the F number is. Your render will be crisp. You only have to worry when you use depth of field to give depth to your render. So when you want to use depth of field, first adjust the position of your target, then the F number to control the depth of field, and then if you want to make your render brighter, go and adjust the shutter speed. Cameras and V-Ray also offer another setting, the exposure value. The exposure value controls the sensitivity of the camera to the scene lighting levels, and it is a number that represents a combination of a camera's shutter speed and f-number. So, we have the option to either adjust the three settings we just mentioned, which are the f-number, the shutter speed and the film speed, or we can just adjust the exposure value. When we enable the exposure value, the other three factors are basically locked. Let's see that in action. Select your camera, go to the Modify tab and open the Color and Exposure rollout. Click on the exposure setting and select exposure value. The exposure value is by default 13. The lower we go, the brighter the render will get. Let's first produce a render with the default value of 13. So you see that our render got darker, ignoring the f-number, shutter speed and film speed that we set earlier. Even if I go and change the settings and let's say make the shutter 15, nothing changes. While with 15, we should be approximately 3 times brighter, okay? Now we only control the brightness from the exposure value. Let's go to the exposure value and type 11. The lower we go, the brighter our render will be. It is still quite dark, so I will type 9 and re-render. And I will go even lower to 8. To me, especially if you're a beginner, it is way easier to adjust the brightness of your render through the exposure value because it's only one setting that you need to adjust, and basically start your testing with the default value of 13 and just keep going lower to brighten your render. Once you are satisfied with the brightness or you are close enough, don't forget to enable the correction controls we mentioned in the first section, the rendering settings. You will notice back here some noise and staggered edges. That's because I am using low rendering settings to get fast results. Once we are satisfied, we can go and increase the settings. Now that you know how to set up a camera and adjust the brightness of your renders, I have an exercise for you. I would like you to set more cameras in the scene, like the ones I show you here, or you can choose where you want to set them and send me to see your result.